Adrian Jasson, known as Chicago's Ice King, operated on cold logic, no feelings, no forgiveness, and no explanations. That ruthlessness led him to unceremoniously fire Flora, the only nanny capable of drawing a smile from his traumatized daughter. He viewed her dismissal as simply removing a liability, unaware that he was severing the only lifeline in his home. He never expected that the resulting silence would be broken by 6 simple words from his daughter, words powerful enough to bring a killer to his knees and shatter an empire. This narrative goes beyond a wrongful termination. It exposes the devastating cost of the secrets we keep to protect those we love. The rain in Chicago didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. From the 34th floor of the Jasson penthouse, the city looked like a circuit board shorting out, sparks of amber and red bleeding into the grey mist. Flora Bennett stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass in the nursery, her breath fogging the pain. Behind her, 6-year-old Bella was humming. It was a soft, jagged sound, like a radio struggling to find a frequency. But to Flora, it was a symphony. When Flora had arrived 6 months ago, Bella Jasson hadn't made a sound, not a whimper, not a cry, not a word. She had been mute since the night her mother, Catherine, died in the back seat of a sedan that had been riddled with bullets meant for her father. "Look, Bella," Flora whispered, not turning around, knowing the girl was watching her reflection. "The lights are blurry tonight, like magic." Bella didn't answer, but the humming stopped. A small hand tugged at Flora's cardigan. Flora turned and knelt, leveling herself with the dark-haired girl who possessed her father's piercing blue eyes, but none of his coldness. Bella held up a drawing. It was crude, done in heavy black crayon. A tall stick figure in a suit, a smaller one in a dress, and a large black circle around them. "Is this Daddy and you?" Flora asked gently. Bella shook her head. She pointed to the girl, then to Flora. Then she pointed to the black circle and shivered. "Protection," Flora guessed. Bella nodded vigorously. Flora's heart ached. She brushed a stray curl from Bella's forehead. "I won't let the dark circle get you. I promise." The door to the nursery creaked open. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Standing in the doorway was Adrian Jasson. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Flora's entire college tuition. His face was a mask of sharp angles and stubble, his eyes like chipped flint. He wasn't a man who walked into rooms. He occupied them, sucking the oxygen out of the air. "Daddy." Bella didn't say the word, but her body language screamed it. She scrambled up, clutching her drawing, running toward him. Adrian didn't bend down. He didn't open his arms. He stiffened, looking at his daughter as if she were a fragile antique he was terrified of breaking. He placed a large hand on top of her head, a gesture that looked more like a benediction than a hug. "Go to your room." "Bella," he said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of inflection. Bella froze. She looked up, confused. She looked at Flora. "Go," Adrian repeated, sharper this time. Bella dropped the drawing. She looked between the 2 adults, sensing the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. With a soft sob, she turned and ran into her adjoining bedroom. Slamming the door, Flora stood up, her pulse quickening. She smoothed her skirt, trying to summon the courage that had gotten her through 6 months in the house of a notorious crime lord. "Mr. Jasson, she was just showing you." "Pack your bags," Adrian said. He didn't look at her. He walked past her to the window, staring out at the same rain she had been admiring. Flora blinked. "Excuse me. You heard me. Miss Bennet, pack your things. Rocco will drive you back to your apartment in an hour. Your final check will be wired by morning. I've added a 20% bonus for your discretion." Flora felt the blood drain from her face. "I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? Bella is finally making progress. She hummed today. She's sleeping through the night. If this is about the incident with the press last week, I swore I didn't." Adrian turned. The movement was violent in its speed. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, towering over her. "This isn't a negotiation. This is a termination. You are no longer required." "No reason." Flora's voice shook, but she held her ground. "You're firing me for no reason. I don't need a reason," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I own this city. I own this building, and I own the contract you signed. Section 4, Clause B, employment at will. You are dismissed." "I'm not a contract lawyer. Adrian, I'm the woman raising your daughter." Flora snapped, the use of his first name slipping out before she could stop it. Adrian's eyes narrowed. For a second, Flora saw something behind the ice, a flash of panic. Perhaps, or rage. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You are an employee," he corrected cold, "and you are becoming a distraction. Bella is too attached. It makes her weak. It makes her vulnerable. It makes her human," Flora cried out. "She's a child who watched her mother die. She needs attachment, not isolation. She needs to survive." Adrian roared. The volume was shocking in the quiet nursery. "And she won't survive if she thinks the world is soft. She won't survive if she thinks people stay. Everyone leaves. Flora. Better she learns that now than when she's staring down the barrel of a gun." He stepped back, adjusting his cuffs, the mask slipping back into place. 1 hour. If you're not in the lobby, Rocco will remove you." He turned and walked out, leaving Flora standing over the dropped drawing, the black circle around the two of them, looking less like protection now, and more like a target. The packing was a blur. Flora threw clothes into her suitcase without folding them. Her hands were trembling so badly she dropped her toothbrush twice. She wasn't crying, she was too angry to cry. She was furious at the injustice, furious at his coldness, but mostly terrified for Bella. She looked around the guest suite that had been her home. It was luxurious, impersonal, and cold. The only warmth in this penthouse had been the bond she built with that little girl. She zipped the bag shut. A knock sounded at the door. It wasn't Rocco. It was Adrian's consigliere, an older man named Silas. Silas had kind eyes and a weary demeanor, like a priest who had heard too many confessions he couldn't absolve. "Miss Bennet," Silas said softly. "The car is ready." "Does she know?" Flora asked, hoisting her bag. "Does Bella know I'm actually leaving?" Silas looked down at his polished shoes. "Mr. Jason has locked the bedroom door." He felt it was best to avoid a scene. "He locked her in," Flora gasped. "She's claustrophobic." "Silas, you know that." "It's for the best," Silas murmured, though he didn't sound convinced. "Come, please, don't make this harder." Flora walked through the marble hallway, the wheels of her suitcase clicking rhythmically like a countdown. As they passed the double doors of Bella's room, Flora stopped. She could hear it. It wasn't a scream. It was a thudding. Bella was throwing her small body against the door. Thud, 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 and a high-pitched, muffled, keening sound that tore through Flora's heart like a serrated knife. "I have to go to her," Flora said, dropping the handle of her bag. Silas stepped in her path, his hand resting on her shoulder. It was a gentle touch, but firm as iron. "If you go in there, Flora, he won't just fire you. He will ensure you never work in this country again. Adrian he is on edge. There are things happening in the families. Shifts in power. He believes he is doing this to protect you both. By breaking her heart," Flora spat. "A broken heart is better than a stopped one," Silas said cryptically. "Please, go." Flora looked at the door one last time. "Tell her," Flora choked up. "Tell her I didn't want to go. Tell her the black circle can't touch her if she's brave." Silas nodded solemnly. "I will try." Flora walked to the elevator. The doors slid open, revealing Rocco, a mountain of a man who looked at her with pity. She stepped in. As the doors began to close, she saw Adrian standing at the far end of the hallway, in the shadows. He was watching her leave. He held a tumbler of whiskey in one hand, his knuckles white. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He just watched until the metal doors severed the connection. Down in the lobby, the rain had turned into a deluge. Rocco held an umbrella for her as she climbed into the black SUV. "Where to, Miss Bennett?" "Just drive," she said. "Anywhere but here." As the car pulled away, Flora looked back up at the penthouse. The lights were on. She imagined Bella crying herself to sleep. She imagined Adrian drinking alone in the dark. What Flora didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that upstairs, the silence had returned. But the peace had not. Adrian unlocked Bella's door 10 minutes after Flora left. He expected a tantrum. He expected objects to be thrown. He was ready for the anger. He could handle anger. Anger was a language he spoke fluently. He pushed the door open. "Bella." The room was dark. The nightlight, usually a comforting blue star, had been smashed against the wall. Bella was sitting in the center of the floor, surrounded by the debris of her room. She had ripped the sheets off the bed. She had torn the heads off her dolls. She was sitting cross-legged, staring at the wall. "Bella," Adrian said, stepping over a decapitated teddy bear. It had to be done. Flora had to go. She wasn't family. We only trust family. He knelt down, trying to catch her eye. "Talk to me, sweetie, or do something. Scream at me." Bella turned her head slowly. Her face was dry. No tears. Her eyes were eerily calm, possessing a terrifying maturity that belonged to a 40-year-old widow, not a 6-year-old child. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It wasn't the drawing from earlier. It was a photograph Flora must have given her. A photo of the three of them, Flora, Adrian, and Bella, taken by accident on Flora's phone when Bella had grabbed it weeks ago. In the photo, Adrian was looking at Flora, not the camera, and for the first time, seeing it printed out. Adrian saw the look on his own face. It wasn't cold. It was hungry. It was longing. Bella held the photo up to his face. She tapped Flora's face, then his. Then she opened her mouth. Her voice was raspy from disuse, cracking like dry leaves underfoot. "She wasn't the one who left." Adrian froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. "What?" Bella took a breath, her small chest heaving. She looked straight into her father's soul, dismantling his defenses with surgical precision. "Mommy left," Bella whispered, her voice gaining strength. "Flora stayed. You made Flora leave. You are the bad circle." "Daddy," The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. He stumbled back, bracing himself against the doorframe. "You are the bad circle." "Bella, no, You made the quiet come back," she said, finally letting a single tear fall. "I hate the quiet." Adrian looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the monster he had become reflected in her eyes. He wasn't the protector. He was the jailer. He had fired the only light in their lives because he was terrified of the warmth. He was terrified that if he loved Flora, he would lose her just like he lost Catherine. So he killed it before it could kill him. But looking at Bella, broken and judging him, he realized he had made a fatal miscalculation. He slid down the doorframe until he hit the floor, burying his face in his hands. The great Adrian Jasson, the Ice King, began to weep. He cried for his wife. He cried for his daughter. And he cried for the woman he had just sent away into the rain. But tears wouldn't bring her back. And what Adrian didn't know was that by sending Flora away, he hadn't saved her. He had sent her straight into the hands of the enemy he had been trying to keep her from. Rocco's phone rang in the front seat of the SUV as they navigated the slick streets. He answered it, listened for a moment, and his face went pale. He looked in the rearview mirror at Flora, his eyes wide with horror. "Miss Bennet," Rocco said, his voice trembling, "we have a problem. We're being followed, and it's not the boss." The rain was no longer a drizzle. It was a rhythmic drumming against the roof of the armored SUV, sounding like 1,000 tiny fingers trying to claw their way inside. Flora sat in the back, her heart still heavy with the image of Bella's face, when she noticed Rocco's posture change. He wasn't just driving anymore, he was hunting for an exit. "Rocco, what's going on?" Flora asked, her voice trembling. Rocco didn't answer immediately. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He checked the side mirror, then the rear view, then back again. "Stay low, Miss Bennet. On the floor. Now. Rocco." "Do it," he roared. Flora scrambled off the leather seat, tucking herself into the footwell. Seconds later, the world exploded. A heavy thud rocked the SUV as a black sedan rammed their rear bumper. The screech of metal on metal was deafening. Flora screamed, pressing her face into the carpet, smelling the scent of expensive leather and gunpowder, the permanent cologne of the Jasson Empire. "It's the Moretti crew," Rocco gritted out, his voice strained as he wrestled with the wheel. "They've been waiting for you to leave the penthouse. You're the only leverage they have against Adrian." Flora's breath hitched. Adrian hadn't fired her because she was a distraction. He had fired her because the war was starting, and he thought he was cutting her loose from the blast zone. But he had timed it perfectly for her to be a sitting duck. The SUV swerved violently. Glass shattered as a bullet punched through the reinforced window, spider-webbing the pane but not breaking it. Rocco returned fire, his hand extending out the window, the crack, crack, crack of his pistol vibrating through the frame of the car. "I can't lose them," Rocco shouted over the wind. "Flora, listen to me. There's a burner phone in the glove box. Reach up and grab it. Hit the only contact saved. Tell Adrian we're at the 4th Street Bridge. Tell him I'm sorry." Flora reached up, her fingers fumbling against the plastic until she found the phone. She dialed. It picked up on the first ring. "Rocco, report," Adrian's voice came through, cold and sharp. "Adrian, it's Flora." She sobbed. "They're hitting us." "Rocco is..." A second ramming sent the SUV spinning. The phone flew from Flora's hand. She heard Adrian's voice screaming her name through the speaker, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror she never thought the Ice King was capable of. Then, the SUV flipped. The world went upside down. Gravity became an enemy. Flora felt a sharp pain in her temple. And then, the world went black. When Flora woke up, the air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and cigar smoke. She was tied to a wooden chair in a basement that felt like a tomb. Her head throbbed. A steady 75 beats per minute pulse of agony behind her eyes. "She's awake," a voice rasped. Flora squinted. Standing before her was a man she recognized from the files Adrian kept in his study, Dominic Moretti. He was the antithesis of Adrian, loud, sloppy, and cruel. "Where is Bella, Wuswahu?" was the first thing Flora managed to choke out. Dominic laughed, a wet, guttural sound. "The kid is safe in her golden cage, for now. But your boss, he's been a very difficult man to reach. He doesn't care about his soldiers. He doesn't care about his money. But I saw the way he looked at you at the gala last month. He looked at you like a man looks at a life raft." "He fired me," Flora said, her voice cracking. "He doesn't want me. You're wasting your time." "Is that right?" Dominic leaned in, his breath smelling of cheap wine. "Then why is he currently burning down half of my warehouses looking for you? Why has he put a $5 million bounty on my head in the last hour?" Flora froze. Adrian was coming. Not for a contract. Not for a debt. But for her. "He won't give you what you want," Flora whispered. "He will give me everything," Dominic sneered, pulling out a knife. "Because if he doesn't, I'm going to send him your fingers, one by one, until he remembers how to sign a treaty." He raised the blade. Flora closed her eyes, praying for Bella, praying that the little girl wouldn't have to lose another person she loved. Suddenly, the heavy steel door at the top of the stairs didn't just open, it ceased to exist. An explosion rocked the building, sending dust and debris raining down. Shouts erupted from upstairs, followed by the systematic, rhythmic thud of suppressed gunfire. It wasn't a rescue mission. It was an execution. Adrian Jasson stepped through the smoke at the top of the stairs. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore. His white shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, stained with blood that wasn't his. He held a tactical rifle with the ease of a man holding a pen. "Dominic," Adrian said. His voice was so quiet it was scarier than the explosion. "Step away from her. One more step and she dies. Jasson!" Dominic yelled, grabbing Flora by the hair and pressing the knife to her throat. Adrian didn't stop. He walked down the stairs, his eyes fixed on Flora. "You think you can use her against me? You think she's my weakness?" Dominic's hand shook. "I know she is." "You're wrong," Adrian said, stopping 10 feet away. He dropped his rifle. He raised his hands. "She isn't my weakness. Dominic, she's the only thing that kept me from turning this city into a graveyard. You took her. You hurt her. Now, there is nothing left to keep the monster on a leash." In a movement too fast for Flora to track, Adrian pulled a backup piece from his waistband. One shot. It didn't hit Dominic. It hit the light fixture above his head. The room plunged into total darkness. Flora heard a struggle, the sound of a blade hitting the floor, and a sickening crack. When the emergency lights flickered on, Dominic was on the floor, his arm twisted at an impossible angle. Adrian was standing over him, his hands wrapped around the man's throat. "Adrian, stop!" Flora screamed. Adrian looked up. His face was distorted with a rage so primal it made Flora's heart stop. But as his eyes met hers, wet with tears and wide with fear, the tension left his body. He let go of Dominic, who slumped into unconsciousness. Adrian stumbled toward Flora, his hands shaking as he cut her zip ties. The moment she was free, she didn't run. She fell into him. He held her with a desperation that broke her heart. He buried his face in her neck, and for the first time, she felt him shudder. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry. Flora." They didn't go back to the penthouse. Adrian took her to a safe house, a modest brick cottage on the outskirts of the city that looked like a normal family home. As Flora sat on the kitchen counter, Adrian cleaned the cut on her forehead with antiseptic. The silence between them was heavy, but it wasn't the cold silence of the penthouse. It was the silence of two people who had survived a wreck. "Why did you really fire me, Adrian?" Flora asked softly. "Don't give me the distraction line again." Adrian set the cotton ball down. He looked at his hands, scarred and calloused. "My wife's death wasn't an accident. Flora, it was a betrayal. Someone inside my own house gave up our coordinates. For 3 years, I've looked at everyone as a potential traitor. I've kept Bella in a vacuum because I thought if she didn't love anyone, no one could use her against me." He looked up, his blue eyes shimmering. "Then you came, and you were so loud. Not with your voice, but with your heart. You made her laugh. You made me want things I haven't wanted in a decade. I realized that if they found out what you meant to us, they would do exactly what Dominic did tonight." "So you pushed me away to save me," Flora said, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I thought I could control the outcome," Adrian said, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "But when I saw that empty nursery tonight, when I saw the drawing Bella made of the bad circle, I realized I wasn't protecting her. I was just making sure the only people left in her life were the ones who didn't love her." He stepped closer, placing his hands on either side of her on the counter. "Bella spoke today. Flora. After you left, she told me she hated the quiet. She told me I was the one who made it come back." Flora reached out, cupping his face. "She loves you, Adrian. She just wants her father, not a boss." "I don't know how to be a father without being a monster," he admitted, his voice breaking. "The world I live in, it doesn't allow for nannies and bedtime stories." "Then change the world," Flora whispered. The moment was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the gravel driveway. Adrian was on his feet in a second, gun drawn, his instincts snapping back into place. "It's okay, it's Silas," Flora cried, seeing the familiar black sedan. The door opened, and Silas stepped out, but he wasn't alone. A small figure in pink pajamas scrambled out of the back seat, ignored the rain, and ran toward the house with everything she had. "Flora, Flora." The voice was small, high-pitched, and slightly raspy, but it was the most beautiful thing Adrian had ever heard. Bella burst through the front door, skidding on the hardwood. She didn't go to her father. She threw herself at Flora's legs, sobbing into her skirt. Don't go again." Adrian stood there, his gun lowered, watching the two most important people in his life cling to each other. He looked at Silas, who stood in the doorway, soaking wet and wearing a knowing smile. The girl wouldn't stop screaming your name. "Boss." Silas said, "I figured the safe house was better than a riot at the penthouse." Adrian knelt down, joining them on the floor. He wrapped his massive arms around both of them, creating a new circle. Not a black circle of protection, but a circle of family. "I'm not going anywhere." "Be," Flora promised, looking at Adrian over the girl's shoulder. None of us are. But as they sat there, a family for the first time, Adrian's phone buzzed on the counter, a text from an unknown number. The girl is a beautiful talker. Adrian. Too bad she knows the secret her mother died for. Are you sure you want the nanny to hear it, too? Adrian's blood turned to ice. The nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. The cabin was supposed to be a sanctuary, a quiet refuge of brick and cedar tucked away from the neon-soaked corruption of Chicago. But inside, the air had turned toxic. The vibration of Adrian's phone against the marble kitchen island sounded like a death knell. He stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in his eyes like a digital ghost, casting long, jagged shadows across his sharp features. The message was a blade, twisted into a wound he thought had scarred over years ago. She knows the secret her mother died for. Adrian looked at Bella. She was currently curled into Flora's lap on the sofa, her small thumb hooked into the edge of a fleece blanket. She was finally drifting into an exhausted sleep, her chest rising and falling in a rhythmic, peaceful cadence that Adrian felt he didn't deserve to witness. To his left, the fireplace crackled, but the warmth couldn't penetrate the ice forming in his marrow. He had built an empire on information, on knowing every shadow in the city. But he had ignored the deadliest shadow of all, the one living inside his own bloodline. Adrian. Flora's voice was a soft tether, pulling him back from the ledge of his own mind. She hadn't missed the way his posture had turned to stone. You went pale. Is it the Morettis? Did they follow us? Adrian didn't answer immediately. He stood up, his joints popping with a sound like distant gunfire. He walked to the window, staring into the dark woods of the Illinois countryside. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a thick, suffocating fog that swallowed the trees. "Silas," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a subsonic frequency that signaled a shift from father to predator. Silas, who had been cleaning a sidearm at the kitchen table, looked up instantly. He saw the look in Adrian's eyes, the look of a man who was preparing to burn the world down. "Take Flora and Bella to the basement," Adrian commanded. "There's a panic room behind the wine cellar. It's reinforced with 6 inches of lead-lined steel. Go, now." Flora stood up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Adrian, talk to me. We just got through one nightmare. Don't shut me out again. Don't be the bad circle twice in one night. Whatever is on that phone, we face it together." Adrian turned, and for a fleeting, agonizing second, the mask of the Ice King cracked. He stepped toward her, his large hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed the small bandage he'd just applied to her forehead, a tender gesture that contrasted sharply with the tactical vest he was already reaching for. "I'm not shutting you out. Flora," he whispered, his voice thick with a raw, terrifying honesty. "I'm making sure there's still a you left to talk to. This isn't a street war anymore. This is a reckoning. Just give me 10 minutes. Please." Silas didn't wait for a second order. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a seasoned soldier. Leaning down to scoop the sleeping Bella into his arms, the girl let out a small, soft whimper, but didn't wake. Flora looked at Adrian one last time, a look of desperate, unspoken love before she followed Silas through the heavy basement door. The click of the lock sounded like a finality. Adrian was alone in the silence. He picked up the phone and dialed the number back. It was picked up on the first ring, the connection so clear he could hear the sound of a luxury car engine idling in the background. "You have a lot of nerve using my wife's name to threaten me," Adrian hissed, his fingers tightening around the device until the glass began to spiderweb. "I'm not threatening you, Adrian," the voice on the other end said. It was smooth, cultured, and devastatingly familiar. It was a voice that had shared Christmas dinners and board meetings with him for 30 years. It was Julian Vane, Adrian's own stepbrother, the man who managed the legitimate side of the Jason shipping empire, the man who handled the lawyers and the lobbyists while Adrian handled the streets. "Julian," Adrian breathed, the betrayal hitting him harder than any bullet ever could. "I'm reminding you of why Catherine had to go," Julian continued, his tone conversational, as if he were discussing a dip in stock prices. "She was a beautiful woman, Adrian, but she was nosy. She found the ledger. She realized the Jason name wasn't just built on booze and gambling. It was built on the one thing even you, in all your noble villainy, claimed to be above." Adrian felt the floor tilt beneath his boots. The shipping containers. The special cargo Julian always insisted on overseeing personally. "Human trafficking." "Exactly." Julian chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "Catherine was going to the feds. She was going to blow the whole thing apart. I had to stop her. It was a business necessity, and now, your little miracle of a daughter. She was in that car. Remember, she wasn't just silent because of the trauma, Adrian. She was silent because she heard Catherine tell her exactly where the ledger was hidden. And she heard Catherine tell her who pulled the trigger." Adrian's breath came in ragged hitches. All those years of watching Bella struggle to speak, thinking her silence was a wall she had built to protect herself from the memory of the blood. But it wasn't a wall. It was a vault. She was protecting the secret that would destroy her family. "You killed her," Adrian whispered, the words tasting like ash. "You sat at her funeral. You held my hand while they lowered the casket." "I saved the family," Julian snapped, his voice finally losing its calm. "And now, you've brought a civilian, a nanny, into the inner sanctum. You've let your guard down for a woman who has no business in our world. You're soft, Adrian. You've been compromised by sentiment. The board has voted. I'm coming for the keys to the kingdom, and I'm taking the girl to make sure she never tells a soul where that book is. Or maybe I'll just make sure she never speaks again. Permanently. If you touch them," Adrian said, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop to absolute 0. "I will burn this city until there isn't a brick left standing for you to hide behind. I will spend every cent of the Jason fortune to ensure your death is a legend of agony. See you in 20 minutes. Brother, try not to make a mess of the rug." The line went dead. Adrian didn't waste a second. He moved through the house with a practiced, lethal grace. He went to the gun safe, hidden behind a fake wood panel in the pantry. He pulled out 2 modified 9mm pistols, a tactical vest, and several flashbang grenades. He wasn't just a boss anymore. He was a man defending his heart. He checked the perimeter cameras on his tablet. Black-clad figures were already moving through the tree line. Julian hadn't given him 20 minutes. He had given him 5. These weren't street thugs like the Moretti crew. These were professionals, ex-military mercenaries, hired with the very money Adrian had helped Julian accumulate. Adrian turned off all the lights in the cabin. He knew this floor plan better than they did. He moved to the kitchen, splashing a gallon of cooking oil across the hardwood floor near the entrance, then moved to the top of the stairs. The front door was kicked off its hinges with a thunderous crack. 2 men entered, their suppressed rifles sweeping the room in the green glow of night vision goggles. Adrian didn't wait. He dropped a flashbang from the balcony. Boom! The white light turned the room into a bleached-out nightmare. The mercenaries staggered, blinded. Adrian opened fire. 2 shots, 2 hits. The men slumped to the oil-slicked floor. A third man entered, firing wildly, but Adrian was already gone, melting back into the shadows of the hallway. He checked the basement door. It was still secure, but he could hear the muffled sound of a struggle coming from inside. His heart skipped a beat. Inside, he threw the door open, his gun raised. Silas was on the floor, groaning, a gash across his temple. The window to the panic room's outer chamber, a small ventilation shaft he thought was too small for a man, had been breached. And Julian Vane was standing there. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was in a bespoke navy suit, looking perfectly out of place in the damp basement. He had Flora by the hair, a silver pistol pressed against her temple. With his other hand, he gripped Bella's arm. The little girl was frozen, her eyes wide, staring at her father. "Drop them, Adrian," Julian commanded, "or the nanny gets the first bullet, and the brat gets the second. I've always been a better shot than you. More clinical. Less emotional." Adrian looked at Flora. Her face was pale, but her eyes weren't pleading for her own life. She was looking at Bella. "Let them go." "Julian," Adrian said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He slowly lowered his guns to the floor. "You want the seat? It's yours. I'll sign the papers. I'll take them and leave the country. You'll never hear from us again." "I can't let them walk." "Adrian," Julian said, his eyes gleaming with a manic, flickering light. "You know how this ends. Witnesses are liabilities. And Bella, she's the biggest liability of all. Tell him, Bella, tell your daddy what Mummy said before the lights went out in the car. Tell him who the monster is." The basement was silent. Save for the drip of a leaky pipe, Adrian watched his daughter. He saw the way she looked at Julian, not with the fear of a child, but with the cold, hard recognition of a victim seeing her tormentor. Bella took a breath. It was a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to pull all the oxygen out of the room. She looked at her father, then she looked directly into Julian's eyes. "Mummy said—" Bella's voice was clear, ringing through the concrete room like a silver bell. "Mummy said the monster isn't the man with the gun. The monster is the man who smiles while he watches you bleed." She narrowed her eyes, her small voice turning into a whip. "You were smiling. Uncle Julian, when the car stopped and Mummy didn't move. You looked through the window and you smiled at me." Julian's face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. "Shut up, you little—" In that split second, as Julian's grip on Flora loosened in his fury. Flora didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She remembered the weight of the backup pistol she had snatched from the kitchen counter while Adrian was looking at the phone. She didn't miss. Crack. The shot grazed Julian's shoulder, sending his silver pistol skittering across the floor. Adrian didn't wait for a second chance. He moved like a predatory cat, crossing the distance in 3 strides. He didn't use a gun. He used his hands. He slammed Julian against the concrete wall, his fingers locking around his brother's throat. The sound of Julian's breath rattling in his chest was the only sound in the room. "For Catherine!" Adrian growled, his vision tunneling into a red haze of vengeance. "Adrian!" "No," Flora shouted, rushing forward and grabbing his arm. "Don't do it! Not like this! Not in front of her!" Adrian looked at Bella. She was watching him. She wasn't crying. She was waiting to see if her father was the man who saved her, or just another version of the man who had destroyed her mother. Adrian's knuckles were white. His muscles were coiled to snap Julian's neck. But then, he felt Bella's small hand touch his lower back. He let go. Julian slumped to the floor, gasping for air. Adrian turned away, scooped Bella into his arms, and pulled Flora toward him. The circle was no longer about shadows and secrets. It was about the light they had found in the middle of the wreckage. "Silas!" Adrian roared. "Call the authorities, not our guys. The feds. Tell them we have the ledger, and tell them we have a murderer in custody." As the sirens began to wail in the distance, Adrian held his daughter tight, knowing that the silence was finally, truly over. The basement was heavy with the scent of ozone, damp concrete, and the metallic tang of blood. Julian Vane lay crumpled at the base of the stone wall, a broken shadow of the man who had tried to usurp a throne, built on bones. Adrian stood over him, his chest heaving, his hand still trembling from the sheer force of the restraint it had taken not to end his brother's life then and there. The silence that followed the gunshot was absolute, broken only by the ragged breathing of the 4 people left standing in the ruins of a dynasty. "It's over, Adrian," Flora whispered, stepping into the center of the room. She was shaking, her hair disheveled, and her eyes bright with the remnants of terror. But she held the small backup pistol with a grip that had become steady. She wasn't just the nanny anymore. She was the woman who had walked through the fire to bring his daughter back from the edge of the abyss. Adrian looked down at Bella, who was still clinging to his leg, her small fingers bunched into the fabric of his tactical trousers, for the first time in 3 long, silent years. The haunting, vacant look in her eyes had been replaced by something sharp, present, and fierce. She had found her voice in the darkest hour, and in doing so, she had shattered the glass cage that had held the Jason family in a frozen grip of grief. "Silas!" Adrian barked, his voice regaining the resonant, authoritative edge that had made him a legend in the Chicago underworld. He didn't look back as his consigliere managed to stand, wiping a streak of blood from his brow. The encrypted drive in the wall safe behind the library. It has the digital coordinates for the ledger Bella described. "Get it. Now. We aren't just taking Julian down tonight. We're burying the entire board of directors. Every man who knew about the special cargo in the shipping lanes. Every man who looked the other way while my wife was executed in that car. They all fall tonight." Silas nodded, a grim, satisfied smile touching his lips. "It will be a pleasure, boss. I've waited 3 years to see the ledger see the light of day." "Don't call me that," Adrian said, his gaze finally softening as he turned to Flora and Bella. "There is no more boss. There is no more Ice King. There is only the survivor." The next few hours were a whirlwind of controlled, surgical chaos. Adrian utilized his remaining loyalists' men like Rocco, who had survived the SUV crash with only a broken arm and a bruised ego, not to fight a war, but to facilitate a total surrender. Adrian knew that to save Bella and Flora, he had to destroy the world that made them targets. He bypassed his own corrupt security details and contacted a specific task force within the Department of Justice men he had kept on a break glass in case of emergency list for years. He didn't negotiate for immunity. He negotiated for protection. He offered them the keys to the largest criminal shipping empire in the Midwest in exchange for 2 things: the permanent incarceration of Julian Vane and a new life for a woman and a child who deserved to forget the sound of gunfire. By the time the sun began to bleed over the jagged Chicago skyline, painting the skyscrapers in shades of bruised purple and gold, the Jason penthouse was being swarmed by federal agents. The empire was being dismantled piece by piece. Julian Vane was led away in zip ties, his bespoke Navy suit ruined and his reputation annihilated as the press caught images of the legitimate brother in the back of a Crown Vic. 4 months later, the air was different. It didn't smell of smog, expensive cigars, and rain-slicked asphalt. Instead, it was filled with the intoxicating scent of salt spray, wild dunes, and blooming jasmine. Adrian stood on the weathered wooden deck of a modest beach house on the coast of South Carolina. He was wearing a plain white linen shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were no longer tensed for a fight. His face was tanned by the sun, the deep lines of stress around his eyes having smoothed into something resembling peace. He was a man who had traded an empire for a life, and as he watched the tide come in, he realized he had never felt wealthier. The sliding glass door creaked open, and Flora stepped out, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She looked at him, her smile warm and effortless. They had spent the last 16 weeks healing not just from the physical wounds of that night at the cabin, but from the emotional wreckage of their past lives. Flora had stayed. Through the depositions, through the relocation, through the nights when Adrian woke up shouting Catherine's name, she had stayed. "She's almost ready," Flora said, leaning against the railing next to him. "But she's insisted on wearing her adventure hat for the tide pools today. Apparently, the crabs won't respect her authority without it." Adrian laughed a sound that still felt new, rhythmic, and miraculous in his own ears. "I think the adventure hat is a permanent fixture now, along with the constant chatter. I haven't had a moment of silence in 3 days." "Flora, you used to hate the silence," she reminded him softly, reaching out to take his hand, her fingers interlaced with his. The warmth of her skin a constant reminder that he was no longer alone in the dark. "You said you were the one who made it come back. Well, look at you now. You couldn't find a moment of quiet if you tried." "I was wrong about a lot of things," Adrian admitted, pulling her closer. "I thought I was protecting her by firing you. I thought if I cut the strings of affection, nobody could pull them to make me dance. I didn't realize that the strings are what keep us upright." Just then, the screen door slammed open with a joyful bang. Bella came sprinting out onto the deck, her laughter ringing out like a melody that carried over the sound of the crashing waves. She was wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat adorned with a plastic sunflower and clutching a bright yellow bucket. She didn't hesitate. She ran straight to Adrian and leapt. He caught her with the practiced ease of a father who finally knew his own strength, swinging her around until she squealed with delight. She wasn't the ghost in the nursery anymore. She was a 6-year-old girl with a voice that could move mountains. "Daddy, the tide is all the way out. Flora said we could find a starfish today." "A blue one," Bella exclaimed, her voice vibrant, clear, and full of the future. Adrian kissed her forehead, then looked at Flora, reaching out to pull her into the circle of his arm. The bad circle he had once created out of fear, the circle of isolation and armor, was nothing but a memory, a ghost of a man he no longer recognized. They had built something new in its place, a circle of protection that wasn't built on walls, ledgers, and guns, but on truth, sacrifice, and a love that had been forged in the coldest winter and survived to see the spring. "Then we shouldn't keep the starfish waiting," Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's go." As they walked down the dunes toward the shimmering Atlantic, the sunlight glinting off the water, the king finally found his peace. He didn't need a throne room or a city at his feet. He had a woman who saw the man behind the monster, and a daughter who had taught him that the strongest thing a man can do is listen. As their footprints were washed away by the incoming tide, the past finally disappeared, leaving nothing but the open horizon and the beautiful, noisy life they had chosen together. Thank you so much for joining us for the final chapter of The Mafia Boss and the Nanny. This story started with a silent house and a cold heart, but it ended with the power of a child's voice and a love that refused to be fired. It's a reminder that no matter how deep the shadows of our past, the truth has a way of finding the light.